Jack and the Beanstalk. Once, not so very long ago, nestled in the hills of the Yorkshire Dales, there lived a young lad called Jack. Jack was a lazy boy and lived with his mum in a small cottage just beneath the hills. They were very poor. It was just the two of them since his dad had died, and as time passed they became poorer and poorer, and Jack was so lazy that he just became even lazier than before. Jack and his mum became so poor that they could no longer afford to feed their cow Daisy. Daisy was the only thing they possessed in the whole wide world, and sadly meant only one thing. They must sell Daisy at market. So, with a heavy heart, Jack's mum said, "You must take Daisy, our beloved cow, to market tomorrow. You must sell her and get the best price you can. She is all we have left in the world, so make sure you get paid well for her." Jack went to bed that night and slept fitfully, thinking about what he must do. Jack woke up to a bright and sunny morning, and so set off to market, leading his cow Daisy behind him. Whilst walking on the road, Jack met a butcher, who stopped him and asked,
"Where are you going with that cow?"
When Jack told him, the butcher thought for a moment, then said,
"Will you take these beans for your cow?"
And he showed Jack the unusual beans of different colours.
"Are you joking?"
Laughed Jack.
"I can't take beans in exchange for my cow. I'd be a fool to sell her for beans." "Aha! These beans are no ordinary beans. They are special. They are magic beans."
At this, Jack thought for a moment. If I trade my cow for some coloured beans, magic they are promised. I'm not sure what that means. I'm sure it will be fine, and Mother will be pleased. She needs some cheering up, and the beans will make a feast.
"OK,"
Jack said, and gave Daisy his cow to the butcher, took the beans and carefully put them in his pocket, said goodbye and started walking home. "Mum!" cried Jack when he burst through the front door of the cottage. "Look what I've got! These are magic beans! I got them from the butcher in exchange for our cow." "Oh, Jack!" She was so angry that she grabbed the beans from her son and tossed them through the window and into the garden, where they landed on a velvety soft round of fresh earth. Jack was sent to bed without any dinner. Jack woke late the next morning, his room being much darker than normal. Jack got out of bed and walked across to the window, but when he looked out, he couldn't believe his eyes. Outside his window was a massive beanstalk, which had sprung up overnight. It must have grown from the coloured beans his mum had chucked out of the window. Quickly, Jack threw on his clothes and sprinted downstairs and out into the garden. He ran to the beanstalk and began to climb up. He climbed higher and higher, but every time he looked up, the top of the beanstalk stretched further and further upwards into the sky and out of sight. After climbing for many hours, Jack eventually reached the top. He stepped off the beanstalk and walked into a wild, bare and very different landscape to his home. There were no hills here, only small tufts of rusty, yellow and gold-coloured grass dotted across the land. No flowers, no trees, no birds singing, just an odd hum of the wind gently blowing through the grasses. Jack looked all around and saw a long road that led away into the distance, so he started walking along this road. After he'd walked a little way, he met an elderly woman. "Good morning, Jack," she said. Jack was very surprised that the old woman knew his name. "I know you well, my lad," she told him, smiling. "This is the land that belongs to a wicked giant. And when you were but a baby, this wicked giant stole your father's belongings, everything he owned. Your mother is so poor now because of this. You now have to be very brave. If you can be brave, and I'm sure you are, you can get your father's wealth back. I will help you wherever I can." As soon as the old woman said this, she disappeared. Jack continued along the lonely road. As evening approached and it started to get dark, Jack came to a great castle. He knocked on the huge wooden door and waited. After a moment, he heard footsteps from beyond the door. There was a scrape of a big iron bolt, a few clicks, and then a loud clunk. Very slowly, the door began to open, squeaking and creaking as it moved. A small woman with red hair stood behind it and poked her head round the corner.
"Hello,"
She said.
"Oh, hello,"
Jack replied.
"I have been walking for ages and come far. I am tired and haven't eaten for hours. Can you give me dinner and a bed to sleep in tonight?" "Oh my, you poor boy. You can't stay here. My husband Colin lives here, and he mustn't find you in his castle when he comes home. He is a great big ugly giant, and he'll eat you for his dinner."
When Jack heard this, he felt afraid. But he'd travelled so far and was too tired and hungry that he begged the woman to let him in. Eventually, the giant's wife said,
"Okay, but you must be quiet as a mouse."
Then she led Jack through the hall and into the kitchen. She sat him down at a huge wooden table and set a delicious dinner in front of him. Jack had almost finished eating when the great stone floor started to shake with the sound of heavy, stamping feet. 3 enormous knocks beat against the door. It was the giant returning to the castle. Jack's heart beat loudly in his chest, and the giant's wife jumped and began to shake.
"Quick, quick, hide in here!"
she cried, and helped him scramble into the oven, which luckily was cold. Then she ran to let her husband in. Through the echoing hall and into the kitchen came the giant, stomping his feet as he came. He sniffed the air all around.
"Fee, fi, fo, fum. I smell the blood of an Englishman. Be he alive or be he dead, I'll grind his bones to make my bread,"
he roared.
No, nonsense,"
The giant's wife whispered,
"Surely you must be dreaming."
and she placed a gigantic meal on the table before him. The giant was extremely hungry, so he sniffed no more and tucked into his enormous plate of food. Through a crack in the oven door, Jack peeped. He could barely believe his eyes as he watched the giant eat so much food. At last, the giant finished his meal. He turned to his wife and shouted,
"Bring me my goose."
His wife dutifully brought his goose and trotted off to bed.
"Lay, goosey."
Demanded the giant, and the goose laid a golden egg.
"Lay another egg."
Roared the giant, and Goosey laid another egg, golden and shiny. In a thunderous voice, the giant roared again.
"Lay!"
Many eggs were laid on the table, a dozen at least, all golden and all shiny. Then, at last, in the chair he was sitting, the giant fell asleep. And he snored, and snored. He snored so loudly that the walls of the castle shook with the noise. Hearing the giant snoring, Jack very quietly pushed open the oven door, climbed out, silently, and crept over to the table. Gently, he grabbed the goose and made his way out of the castle, on tiptoe, as quiet as a mouse. As soon as Jack was out the door, he ran and ran and ran as fast as his legs could carry him, faster and faster and on until he almost tripped over the top of the beanstalk. Quickly, with his heart pounding so fast, he climbed down carrying the wondrous goose. He jumped the last 3 feet to the ground and ran into the house, laying the goose on the kitchen table. Jack called out, "Mum, come quick! I have something to show you!" "Lay, Goosey, lay!" As his mum walked into the kitchen, she could barely believe what she was seeing. The goose had laid a golden egg. "Oh, our wood is over. We shall have food aplenty from now on." Jack was happy to see his mum so pleased. However, he longed for another adventure in the giant's land, and after a few weeks had passed, he became even more determined to go back to the castle again. This time, he would wear a disguise. Then the giant's wife would not recognize him. Jack decided to go the very next morning. He set off early, climbing the beanstalk and walking along the road. He arrived at the castle just before evening, knocked at the door and waited. It wasn't long before the giant's wife unbolted and dragged open the huge door.
I'm hungry, and I've walked far, and I'm so tired. Can I sleep here tonight?
He asked.
No, you can't stay here. The boy who came last time stayed, and when he left, he stole my husband's goose,
replied the giant's wife. But Jack kept her talking, being friendly and charming, so that in the end the giant's wife let him in. She gave Jack dinner, as delicious as before, and, as before, she helped Jack hide, but in a cupboard this time. As soon as Jack had hidden, the sound of stamping footsteps, the floor began to shudder, and in stamped the giant, and he began to roar.
Fee, fi, fo, fum. I smell the blood of an Englishman. Be he alive or be he dead, I'll grind his bones to make my bread.
No, nonsense. You're having a wee dream there, the giant's wife said as she placed a massive plate of food in front of him. When the giant at last finished his meal, and before he'd swallowed the last mouthful, he bellowed,
Bring my bags of money here. Now, woman!
And the bags of money were duly brought by his wife, who put them on the table. The greedy giant tipped each bag onto the table. As the golden coins tumbled out and rolled around the table, the giant grabbed each one, counted it, and put it back into a bag. He did this 3 times before falling asleep at the table. Jack, who was still hiding in the cupboard, heard the giant snoring and gently pushed the door open and silently crept out. Tiptoeing over to the table, Jack hastily picked up the money bags without a sound. Slinging them over his shoulder, he very quietly slipped out of the castle. He headed along the road at a slower pace than before because the bags were so heavy and jingled with all the money. As soon as the beanstalk came into sight, Jack quickened his speed and jumped onto it, just managing to hold on to the thick leaves without tumbling all the way down.
Mum, come and see what I've brought,
shouted Jack. Jack's mum could not believe her eyes and was flabbergasted when Jack emptied the contents of the bags onto the kitchen table. She had never seen so much money in her life. With all this money, Jack and his mum were able to build a bigger cottage and buy new furniture to fill it. They had plenty for clothes too, and food to feed an army. They were happy at last that all their worries were gone, and they felt very lucky indeed to be so well off and comfortable. Though it wasn't long before Jack dreamed of another adventure and was more determined than ever to return to the castle where the giant lived. And he would leave the very next day, early. Again, Jack put on a disguise. He came out of his cottage and stood at the bottom of the beanstalk. He looked up as it gently swayed in the breeze and began to climb up. When he arrived at the castle, after the long walk following the usual path, Jack again knocked at the door. The giant's wife again did not seem to know him, as he spun her the same story of hunger and tiredness and pleading to stay the night.
No, you can't stay here. You might be a thief like the last two wee boys were,
she said. But Jack pleaded with her again and again. Finally, after what seemed like forever, the giant's wife looked pitifully at Jack. She felt sorry for him and opened the door wide, led him along the echoing hall and into the kitchen. She gave him a tasty dinner, and then she helped him to hide in a giant washing basket that he climbed into in the corner of the room. After a while, the giant arrived home.
Fee, fi, fo, fum. I smell the blood of an Englishman. Be he alive or be he dead, I'll grind his bones to make my bread. No, nonsense. You're dreaming again,
said his wife, trying to sound calm and cheerful while placing his gargantuan dinner on the table in front of him. And so the giant ate. On finishing his food, the giant demanded in a great booming roar,
"Wife o' mine, bring me my harp."
The giant's wife dutifully brought a golden harp, so beautiful in sound, and placed it on the table before her husband. Then, as before, she climbed the stairs and went to bed.
"Play, me beauty, play,"
came the giant's booming voice, and the strings started to vibrate as the harp began to play the sweetest music Jack had ever heard. The harp played for a long time, the music so delicate and soft that the giant was falling asleep. Then he whispered,
"Stop."
Instantly, the harp stopped playing, and the giant fell into a deep sleep and began to snore. Jack immediately climbed from his hiding place and jumped from the washing basket in the corner and took the harp from the table with such speed that the harp called out,
"Master, oh master, I am being taken."
At once, the giant was awake and so furious and angry.
"You boy, you are the one who has stolen from me. I want my money and my goose back, now!"
he bellowed, and pushing himself out of his chair, staggering as he stood, set off after Jack, carrying the harp. Jack ran and ran. He was so fearful that the giant would catch him before he reached the beanstalk, he ran faster than he'd ever run before. As Jack got nearer to the top of the beanstalk, he looked back and saw the giant was not far behind. He could see the huge strides the giant was making, his angry face getting closer and closer. Suddenly, Jack was at the top, and as he scrambled down the beanstalk, he shouted,
Mom! Come quick! Bring the axe! The giant is chasing me!"
After a moment, Jack's mum ran out carrying the axe. She handed it to Jack, who was exhausted, but now safely on the ground. He held the axe firmly and, swinging it back, looked up at the beanstalk to see the giant had begun to descend it at quite a speed. Jack brought the axe round with great strength and struck a heavy blow to the beanstalk. Both Jack and his mum stood clear and watched as the beanstalk wavered and broke where Jack had driven the axe in, and under the heavy weight of the giant came crashing down with an almighty thud. The giant had fallen flat on his back, completely filling the garden from corner to corner.
Look, now the giant's down. He fell head first upon his crown. See how he's lying on the floor. Look how his giant head has landed in the flower bed. See now his breathing is no more,
Sang Jack to his mum, pointing at the great man who laid sprawled across the garden. Suddenly, the old woman who had spoken to Jack appeared. She spoke softly to them, explaining, "I am the fairy that made Jack give Daisy, your cow, to the butcher in exchange for the magic beans. I wanted him to climb the beanstalk, and I led him to the castle where the giant lived. All your worries are behind you now. You will always have enough food and money for the rest of your lives, and happiness will abound." And that was true for Jack and his mum, because they lived happily ever after. The end.